as a Bitcoiner and as someone who's very deeply ingrained in Bitcoin mining and the direction that it's headed in, I'm not worried that we'll actually be able to meet those goals. In my opinion, Bitcoin mining and proof of work are what will lead to Bitcoin itself becoming the first cryptocurrency to go carbon negative. Not just carbon neutral, but actually be able to go past that. Because the moment it turns carbon neutral, moments later, it's going to turn carbon negative. And proof of stake, dollars, everything out there doesn't have that opportunity. Bitcoin mining has the first real shot at being a global money that has also a super positive impact on the environment and on emissions.
Hey, welcome back everybody to Altcoin Daily. Today we are joined by the great, the powerful Bitcoiner Dennis Porter, the CEO and co-founder of Satoshi Action Fund, a nonprofit that helps educate lawmakers, policymakers on Bitcoin mining. Also a huge Bitcoin proponent himself. Dennis, how are you doing today?
I am doing amazing. Really excited to be here with the two of you on the eve of the merge to talk about the benefits of proof of work on the date that Ethereum is leaving proof of work. So it should be a fun conversation when you combine the White House and everything that's going on in the markets today. Couldn't be a better time to be talking about my favorite thing, Bitcoin mining.
Totally. We'll talk about Ethereum leaving proof of work. We'll talk about the White House, maybe who's better, Joe Biden or Trump for Bitcoin. But before we get into that, Dennis, because I feel like you're a pretty known guy in the Bitcoin crypto space, but give us your story. What's your story? How'd you get into crypto? How'd you get into Bitcoin?
Yeah. 2017, a friend of mine told me that there was this perfectly anonymous internet money. And I was like, no way that's possible. And decided to go investigate for myself. That so-called perfectly anonymous internet money was Bitcoin. Started to do my own research and look into it deeply. Quickly found out that it's not perfectly anonymous internet money after doing my own research, but became just very attracted to all the other reasons why we love Bitcoin today. Particularly some of the ability to kind of bank the unbanked. I come from the Andreas Antonopoulos crowd. So I was a big fan of Andreas, and every time he spoke and said anything, I was an avid listener, read his book so many times, despite the fact that it was a foreign language to me, that it like started falling apart. So ever since then, just been a big, huge Bitcoin believer. I got into Bitcoin mining in 2017, 2018, got some of my old miners sitting behind me, as you can see. But the bear market slammed in and decided to kind of take a break from Bitcoin as far as like trying to work in the space and be active in the space, continue to learn, continue to educate. And that's kind of the jettison. That's the starting story. And then you kind of have all this, kind of empty space in between where I should have been doing something, didn't do anything. I hadn't learned that the bear markets are for building yet. So 2020, 2021 is when I really was like, I got to do something again. Saylor hopped on the scene and I started getting serious FOMO. Hopped onto Clubhouse, started talking. From there, started doing live interviews. From there, launched a podcast. Have since paused the podcast, and I'm now 100% focused on the political endeavors that I think are so important in the Bitcoin digital asset space broadly right now. And that's where I launched Satoshi Action Fund, which is, as you said, an organization focused on going on the offense for Bitcoin miners. We talk to policymakers and regulators on the benefits of Bitcoin mining, which I'm sure we'll go over here shortly. And then we push model policy. So we craft policy and regulation that we think, hey, this is going to be good. If you like Bitcoin mining now, if we've convinced you that you think it's a good thing and you want to attract it to your state or region, here's some model policy that you can implement to safely and responsibly bring some miners to your hometown, home city, even home country. So we're working in the United States at the state level, but also at the provincial level in Canada as well.
And because I think of you, you're like known in the space. I think of you as a pretty Bitcoin centric guy in your Bitcoin crypto journey. Were you always pretty much Bitcoin only, or how did you think about that in your last few years in crypto?
I would say that I have pretty much always been Bitcoin only. Of course, when I first got into the space, I saw all these other tokens being traded and thought it would be a great idea to trade in order to get more Bitcoin. Quickly realized that either I'm just really, really bad at trading, or that's just a bad strategy, generally speaking, which I think is true for most people. But stop doing that completely and just have ever since focused on Bitcoin. Never really been a big fan of anything else. I think that to me, just the concept of Bitcoin being able to end human intervention on money, and then now also being able to really kind of break the logjam on energy markets is really the most exciting things to me about Bitcoin. So I really have consistently just kind of focused on Bitcoin as money, and then now hyper bullish on Bitcoin as a piece of grid infrastructure, as something that can help with renewables and help clean up the environment.
Let's get into that, Dennis. So we'll start off simple so everybody can understand. Is Bitcoin's proof of work mining good or bad for the environment?
It's the ultimate question. I think that's the most important conversation that we are having in crypto today. I'm over here on my side, obviously very bullish on proof of work. I believe that Bitcoin mining will have a very positive impact on the environment. I think it will lead to a reduction in emissions. I think it will incentivize the build out of renewables, wind and solar, but it will also incentivize the build out of new technologies and new renewable technologies. I think that it will help with the grid. It'll help stabilize the grid so it can perform demand and frequency response, which are both services that renewable assets need desperately. When the wind is blowing and the sun is shining is when solar and wind are creating power. When their wind is not blowing and the sun is not shining, they're not creating power. And that's very different from most other energy assets. So nuclear, gas, coal, you name it, anything like even hydro you can throw in there as well. They're somewhat of like an on-demand power source. So they can, you say to the nuclear facility or to the coal plant or to the gas plant, burn more gas, burn more coal, create more energy. That's not how wind and solar work. And because of that, it creates a lot of problems for grid operators. And so Bitcoin mining can kind of come in and solve that problem. And we can really dive deep into that a little bit more you want in a second. But I think ultimately the question is Bitcoin good for the environment? And to me, unequivocally, Bitcoin is one of the best things that's ever happened for the environment in modern history. I mean, maybe that's too bold of a statement. Maybe since the advent of our attention to the need to reduce emissions and the need to clean up the environment and protect the planet.
I think there's two big hurdles that people need to get past when we're talking about Bitcoin energy use and Bitcoin mining. The first is that realizing, that everything in the world uses energy, Christmas lights, air conditioners, and where Bitcoin falls in that. And, surely a decentralized, permissionless, money that anybody can use should use a little bit of energy. So it's getting past that hurdle. And then what you're saying, which I think a lot of people don't know about, is that it can be renewable. It can help with the grid. So maybe we can get more into that.
Yeah. So let's just go further down that thought train when it comes to how it can help renewables. So as I said, renewables are not on-demand power. They're intermittent. And because of that, there are some problems that it causes for the grid. The grid itself needs to be constantly met at supply and demand, needs to match perfectly all the time. There's a measurement for it too, called frequency, where they can show the balance of the grid, and the frequency must stay at like 60 hertz all the time. So because intermittent power sources are constantly being added to the grid, it's making it harder to maintain frequency. It's making it harder to meet supply and demand. Like for instance,
you're saying that sometimes take a wind or even solar, sometimes there's too much wind and they need to put this energy somewhere, or this just gets wasted like that.
Yeah, there's two sides to the renewable problem. One is that it creates too much energy when no one needs it, and other times it doesn't create enough energy when people need the power. And so because of that, the grid is becoming destabilized, unfortunately. Like we want more renewables, we want to decarbonize the grid, we want to move away from fossil fuels as an energy source, but one of the most popular ways of doing that is through renewables. And because of that, it's causing this grid's instability. And there are ways to solve this. There are ways to overcome the instability. Some people have tried to do batteries. There are various types of like smart programs you can do at your home, which are essentially like demand response programs. So the grid is like desperately needs customers who are willing to shut down their usage of energy so that the generation doesn't need to increase and they can just keep the grid balanced, right? So what they'll do is they'll say to homeowners, they'll say to large industry, like, okay, hey, the grid is becoming strained right now. Would you be willing for an incentive to curtail your usage or shut down your usage of power? Well, most people are not going to be willing to do that. Like, right? Like we want our AC on. We want to continue cooking our food, and we're not just going to like within 30 minutes like shut all the power down at our home. There are some customers, large customers that can perform this. Steel plants is a really good example. So a steel plant can shut down, I think it's up to like 95% of their power and do it for up to 2 hours, right? So that's pretty good, right? That's kind of like the Rolls Royce of demand response. But if you come in and you take a look at what's going on with Bitcoin mining and the way that it is participating, it is up to 97%. Some people say 100%, and it can last indefinitely, so infinitely. That's like the perfect kind of customer for renewables. Renewables need way more flexible customers, is what they call them. Customers that are willing to wind down in order to help balance the grid. And Bitcoin mining is the perfect flexible customer because it doesn't need to continue its operation in order to make sure that its economics play out. So if like, for instance, the steel plant, right? The steel plant can only stay shut down for up to 2 hours because the steel starts to cool and then it starts to harden, and then it causes a negative economic impact on the steel plant itself. And so it becomes just uneconomical to shut down beyond 2 hours. Well, there's no problem with that with Bitcoin mining. Bitcoin mining can shut down for as long as you want. There's no negative impact other than just that you aren't mining Bitcoin. So that's a really, really important thing. And that's really big for the grid. It's really big for renewables. I think it's the IEA has said that we need 500 gigawatts of demand response in order to continue decarbonizing the grid by 2035. And this is where I'm kind of coming in and saying that Bitcoin mining is that ultimate demand response customer that can help us meet those goals that will lead to more renewables and will lead to the decarbonization of the grid.
Now, the reason we wanted to have you on today is because in the headlines, I'm sure a lot of our audience saw, the White House just released a crypto mining report. Could you explain what that is and what the conclusion of that report was?
Yeah. So the Biden administration put out an executive order having the whole of government, predominantly the OSTP, the Office of Science, Technology Policy, requested that they put out a report on the energy consumption of Bitcoin and digital asset mining. 6 months later, we have that report, and it covers, energy consumption and the impact of Bitcoin mining on the grid, as well as many other topics. There's been wide-ranging responses to this report. When I saw the Biden administration EO, I was pretty concerned with the report that they wanted. The details of the EO led me to believe that the report that was going to come out was not going to be something that was good for Bitcoin mining or digital asset mining, proof of work. I still think there are bad things in the report. To clarify that, there are things that I don't like, but I was pleasantly surprised. I was one of the few people who pointed it out, even that there were some very big positives in the White House report. And the 4 things that I really focused on that I thought were huge that they had highlighted were Bitcoin mining and its ability to stabilize the grid, its ability to clean up excess methane from oil and gas operations, as well as agriculture, wastewater treatment, landfills, orphaned oil wells as well. Its ability to enhance renewables, kind of diving into what we chatted about a moment ago. And it's also its ability to reduce the level of curtailment that is caused typically by renewables. That was that other side of the story. There's the demand response, and then there's renewables create too much power. And then ultimately that kind of hurts the economics of renewables because they're not able to monetize that energy that they're creating. But Bitcoin mining can come in and monetize that excess energy and lead to better economics for renewables, which means, more funding and more renewables.
So that's the stuff you agree with. What was the stuff that you disagreed with? And also, what does that conclusion mean going forward for the US, you think?
For me, honestly, there really only is one big area that I'm concerned with, and that's any sort of call by the government to say, we should take legislative action to ban proof of work or to kind of come down specifically on this one type of technology. Same thing with the Tornado Cash stuff, right? It's like you're singling out lines of code, and I don't agree with that. And I think that's wrong. And I think that the US government should stay out of the business of picking winners and losers in any sort of technology race. Like, I think proof of work and proof of stake and Bitcoin and Ethereum and every other crypto asset should be allowed to compete, in a free and open market, as long as they are complying by, general rules of, securities laws. I'm not a big fan of securities laws, but there are some projects out there, I'm sure you can agree, which are just like, there is just some absolute full-blown, unafraid to claim it scamming going on in this space. Some people would claim Ethereum is a scam too, but I think you and I and everyone who's pro Bitcoin or pro Ethereum or pro crypto can agree there's some stuff that is it's pretty bad. So I'll stop there on that level of control. Like, again, not a big fan of regulation and government interaction, but if it's going to go after the super scams, don't go after what is very clearly an important conversation and an important battle between two different types of consensus mechanisms. Aside from that, I don't really, there are many little tiny details in the report that I have an issue with, but they're not important enough to highlight. And at the end of the day, the part where it talks about how, we may need to create legislative action against or an executive order against proof of work if it's not able to do, X, Y, Z. And X, Y, Z was basically become cleaner, become more carbon neutral. And I think, on one side, I don't like that statement. But at the same time, as a Bitcoiner and as someone who's very deeply ingrained in Bitcoin mining and the direction that it's headed in, I'm not worried that we'll actually be able to meet those goals. In my opinion, Bitcoin mining and proof of work are what will lead to Bitcoin itself becoming the first cryptocurrency to go carbon negative. Not just carbon neutral, but actually be able to go past that. Because the moment it turns carbon neutral, moments later, it's going to turn carbon negative. And proof of stake, dollars, everything out there doesn't have that opportunity. Bitcoin mining has the first real shot at being a global money that has also a super positive impact on the environment and on emissions.
So it sounds like this White House crypto mining report, although it was somewhat a mixed bag, it seems overwhelmingly positive for Bitcoin and crypto mining, no matter how you look at it. Is that fair?
It's always good to be balanced in the way that you view things. But because I was going in with this mindset that, this was going to be a war and the White House is coming for us, they're right before a very important critical election, they're going to be waving the environmental flag as hard as they can to rally their base, to get them excited. And yet the report was balanced. And so to me, that's huge, because the US government has every incentive in the world to go after Bitcoin mining and do it in a way that's, kind of almost like ruthlessly attacking it. All the incentives aligned for them to go after Bitcoin and for them to go after Bitcoin mining. They don't like Bitcoin because it's, somewhat, some people view it in government as kind of an attack on the financial rails that they control. And Bitcoin mining is, an attack on their decarbonization goals, except for that it's not, but they have an incentive to kind of frame it that way, right? Typically, we don't see government highlighting the positives on things that are somewhat easy to go after and attack. And so, yeah, I am extremely optimistic about what came out of the report, or extremely optimistic and have feelings of being positive about the report, because I did not expect them to highlight Bitcoin mining's ability to stabilize the grid, the ability to clean up methane, its ability to enhance renewables, and its ability to reduce curtailment from renewables as well.
Joe Biden, better than Trump for Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining?
Oh, man, that's a really tough question. Because, on one hand, you have Trump, who has come out against Bitcoin. He has said that he's anti-Bitcoin and that he doesn't like it, that it's competitive with the dollar. And on the other hand, you have, the Biden administration, who really doesn't like Bitcoin mining and wants to come after it. I don't know if I know enough to give a good answer on this, because we just really haven't seen Trump speak enough about it. And really, we haven't seen Biden speak enough about it. But at least I know that Biden's approach right now is balanced. I don't know what Trump's administration's approach would be. However, I do know a lot of folks who were in the previous administration, and I do know a lot of Republicans who are in office right now who are very pro-Bitcoin. And if a new administration is formed, it's very likely that many of those folks would get pulled into the Trump administration, and you would see a lot of very experienced and very knowledgeable Bitcoiners get close to the president, who has previously claimed that he's anti-Bitcoin. I've wrote an article about this before, that it's kind of pivotal that if Trump comes back into office, that we do get people close to him that are pro-Bitcoin, and that if we get enough people close to him and close to his administration, if and when he comes back, I'm not saying he is, but we're just kind of playing around theoretically here, that we need to get as many people in his administration as possible that are able to orange pill him to prevent some sort of aggressive overreach of government. Because like Trump or hate Trump, many people understand that Trump is a pretty aggressive with his bully pulpit, and is the type of person who would, if he sees Bitcoin as a negative or sees Bitcoin as a front to the US goals and foreign policy, could possibly come after it in a very aggressive way. The Biden administration would do it for environmental reasons. The Trump administration would do it for, it's an attack on the dollar, and it's an attack on our ability to control financial rails.
Now, you, like many Bitcoiners, you sound like you're a free market guy. You don't necessarily want the regulation, but just going off any administration, forcing to talk about and maybe implement on Bitcoin mining, what's one policy you'd like to see to make America a leader in Bitcoin mining?
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome. I'm glad we're chatting about this, because, aside from just advocating for Bitcoin mining to policymakers and regulators, Satoshi Action Fund also crafts regulation and policy in-house, model policy. And so after we educate these folks and we say, hey, here's the benefits of Bitcoin mining. It's going to provide high-paying jobs. It's going to provide local investment. It's going to stabilize the grid. It's going to help with renewables. And it's also going to help ensure that you're able to monetize any excess energy that's created on your grid as well. And so when I share some of the benefits of Bitcoin mining to people, especially policy regulatory wise, they're just like, oh, wow, I had no idea Bitcoin mining can do that. And then from there, they're just like, well, how do I safely and responsibly adopt Bitcoin mining in my city or my state or my province? Luckily for Satoshi Action Fund, the majority of energy policy happens at the state and provincial level. So we don't have to concern ourselves with the federal government, which is great, because the federal government is slow and monotonous, and probably one of the most, it's one of the easiest places to go and have your soul die. And kind of like any policy that you want to do, you pretty much have to give up more than you get back in return. That's just the way that the horse trading occurs in DC. That's very different than the states. The states somewhat compete over industry. They compete for jobs. We've seen it with the tech industry. We've seen it with the automobile industry. It's very, very common for states to be like, hey, we're willing to just try this new policy out to see if we can capture this new market, this new industry. And so we have two pieces of model policy that we've created that we think will really help states move the right direction. One of them is a microgrid and grid resiliency policy, which will basically say, you can come in, you can create a microgrid zone, and within those microgrid zones, power generation can be created and managed, potentially by the miner, potentially by the utility themselves, but it'll help miners and people who plug into that generation avoid costs of transmission, dramatically lowering their power prices. But then again, how do we get utilities to be on board, and how do we get public utility commissions to be on board? Those are kind of the governing, there's the utility, which has the, regulated monopoly. You don't really get your choice over who you buy your power from. And then you have public utility commissions, which govern those monopolies. But you need to get those guys on board when you create something like this. And so we, within there, created a framework that would say to the microgrid operator, you have to perform demand response and frequency response back to the grid if and when there is a grid interconnection. So that one is big. That one's key. And we're really looking for a lot of states to move in the right direction on that one. We have, I would say, at least 3, maybe 4 states with advocacy organizations or policymakers on the ground who are willing to push that policy forward. The other one is the orphaned oil well policy. So this is getting into like the environmental cleanup aspect. There are millions of orphaned oil wells all over Alberta, Canada, all over various states through the US, including Texas, Oklahoma, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, a few others in there as well. I think New York is one of them.
These are oil wells that are no longer in use.
Yeah. So unfortunately, in the oil and gas industry, there are boom and bust cycles and just kind of unpredictable problems that occur when you're going into the ground very deep to find oil or gas. And so occasionally, because of the, either lack of production, there could be a bust in oil and gas prices. A lot of these operators go bankrupt, or they just, don't care because the well isn't producing anything anymore and they don't want to have to like clean it up. There's a lot of problems that were created because of that process. And so now we have up to 10 million of these abandoned wells. Up to is a big number, 10 million. It could be anywhere from 5 to 10 million. And these wells are emitting methane into the atmosphere. And methane, as most people know, is 84x worse than carbon dioxide over a 20-year period, and 27 times worse for warming over a 100-year period. And those numbers are probably going to be changing as time goes on, getting worse because of just some of the chemical makeup of the atmosphere. So these wells are emitting methane, and it's just wrecking our environment. It's not only is it going into the air and helping to warm the planet, it is also leaking into groundwater and causing groundwater contamination. It's a massive problem in Texas and in some other states. The problem is no one wants to go in and take these things and remediate them or mitigate them or clean them up or plug them. It's expensive and you don't get anything in return. So there's a lot of efforts underway to try to figure out how to solve this problem. And that's why we came up with this orphaned oil well policy. It would essentially allow the states to give their orphaned oil wells over to a Bitcoin miner. The Bitcoin miner would be able to go in and mine gas, and the state can decide if they would like, after a certain period of time, for the miner to make enough money to afford to plug the well, or some states may want to continue production and allow the miners to continue. But ultimately, either way, it results in a massive reduction of methane emissions, which is a huge problem. All the major environmental groups are starting to turn towards methane as a big problem. And it doesn't just get emitted from these orphaned oil wells. It gets emitted from landfills. It gets emitted from wastewater treatments and from agriculture. And most environmental groups have come to the conclusion that this is the kind of the new fight that we all need to face. Like, we're getting control over carbon. There is some positive movements that are happening in that area, but methane is totally out of control and is causing massive amounts of warming. And it may be the thing that leads to us moving too far into the danger zone. And that's why I'm excited about this piece of policy, because it not only gives states the opportunity to say, hey, Bitcoin miners, come in. We want you here in our space. We want you to clean up the environment. But it could also lead to giving us more time to reduce methane and reduce carbon and avoid some of the dangerous warming temperatures that'll kind of lead to even, worse things down the road, whether it be, kind of making places uninhabitable, heating up certain areas of the planet so much that you can't grow plants or agriculture. There are many problems that could come from too much of an increase in global temperatures. We aren't quite there yet. And we could avoid it potentially if we get a handle on methane emissions. And that's why we're really excited about pushing this policy, because it's a positive environmental cleanup story for Bitcoin mining. But it also brings jobs. It also brings in a nascent tech infrastructure that states can build revenue off of. And also, with these orphaned oil wells, you can now take those wells off the responsibility of the state and off the responsibility of the taxpayer.
Nice. Dennis, well, I want to remind the audience, if you want to follow up and be part of this movement, links to Dennis and his organizations are down below. Go follow him. But, I know we only have not too much longer. So I do want to talk to you about the Ethereum merge. As you said, it's interesting. The day you're recording with us is the day Ethereum goes from proof of work to proof of stake. What are your thoughts on this?
I think we're 8 hours away. It's close. It's really close. And as someone who's been around since 2017, it's we've been hearing for so long that the merge is coming. And I kind of started to think that it was never going to happen, but it's here and it's upon us. And it's a really important point in crypto history. I hope for the sake of the Ethereum people that it goes, anybody who has any assets in ETH, that it goes well.
And you own a little bit of ETH, or?
No,
Oh.
I only own Bitcoin. Sorry, Bitcoin only. I don't trade anything. I don't hold anything else. Except for obviously, real estate, other things outside of the crypto space. But in crypto, I'm Bitcoin only. It's such an interesting conversation because you have this narrative that Ethereum is going to go to proof of stake, and that will lead to Ethereum being carbon neutral or very close to carbon neutral. It'll be a positive story for the environment. And that is an interesting narrative to me because on the other side of things, I am seeing proof of work and Bitcoin mining reduce emissions and improve the economics of renewables and stabilize the grid. It's helping to clean up landfills. It's helping to clean up agriculture and oil and gas operations. And that's happening because of proof of work. And that's happening because of Bitcoin mining. In order for those things to keep going, you need to be on proof of work. So Ethereum leaving from proof of work to proof of stake kind of eliminates it from the conversation around whether it can have a positive impact on the environment. There's no debate that it will have a neutral impact. That's pretty obvious, right? Like it's pretty minimal. Like maybe it'll use a little bit of, cloud server, you guys got to, do some AWS. That's kind of a joke, but you guys are going to have to run some computing. It's insignificant though, in comparison to where your energy consumption is today. But this is kind of the big problem that we have in the world. And you brought it up earlier. We've been taught that energy consumption is bad and that we should reduce it at all costs in order to have a positive impact on the environment. That's not always true. Generally speaking, we should try to reduce consumption and we should try to be responsible with our resources. But as I lined out previously, Bitcoin mining, because of its energy consumption, has the ability to reduce emissions from methane. It has the ability to perform demand response and frequency response, which are both great ways to stabilize the grid and are very much needed in order to build more renewables. But none of that happens without energy consumption. And so by reducing your, energy consumption to proof of stake and leaving proof of work, you're eliminating the ability for Ethereum to have a positive impact. And you're also eliminating its ability to ever go carbon negative. And so that's fine. I mean, that's fine if that's what, the Ethereum camp wants. I'm not involved with the decision-making process. I'm not even an influencer on that side of things. But to me, I would say that at the end of the day, proof of work is what's going to help save the environment. It's going to help reduce emissions and improve the climate, stabilize the grid, provide high-paying jobs, provide local investment, and proof of stake doesn't do any of those things. It's not an attack on Ethereum. Maybe they need to. Maybe there's other technical reasons. Maybe there's ways that they can improve their systems that can't happen because of proof of work. Maybe it's too limiting to them. But when people say that moving to proof of stake is good for the environment, I very strongly challenge that statement.
Well, if you're going from using, some energy in proof of work for perhaps what you deem is, not useful, not revolutionary like Bitcoin, if Ethereum proof of work is less revolutionary and what they're doing is less good, and then it goes to, proof of stake where it uses, virtually no energy or a lot less. And I know you're saying it's going neutral, but it could also be spun as, I guess that's good.
Going neutral is good. I just think that going negative is better. So, if the only way you can go negative is consuming energy, and we're really fortunate that methane as a gas, because you can't burn carbon, right? Like it's impossible. It's not an energy source, but methane is. And Bitcoin mining is one of the only customers of energy that can go after just absolutely stranded, completely remote methane sources and do it in a scalable way, right? Because you can have 20 miners on a spot. You can do a megawatt. There's not very many businesses that are willing to go set up a megawatt on top of a landfill. But Bitcoin mining can, and it can go after non-flared, non-vented stranded methane. And if it goes after enough non-flared, non-vented stranded methane, there's not an environmental group on the planet that can deny that Bitcoin mining is having a positive impact on climate and then also turning potentially carbon negative at a certain point. And I believe that Bitcoin mining could turn carbon negative. Talking to quite a few environmentalists that agree with me, and 2 of them believe that it can happen within the next 2 years.
Wow. That's way faster than I thought you were going to say. Dennis, we'll have to have you back on in a couple months, check back in, see how all this is going. Links for your stuff down below, but just final thoughts for the audience out there.
Final thoughts, buy more Bitcoin, hold on to it. It's going to go up and down. If you care about the climate, if you care about the environment, buy more Bitcoin. Every time you buy more Bitcoin, it incentivizes the building of more methane capture. It incentivizes more demand response, frequency response, and grid stability. So if you care about having a positive impact, every time you buy Bitcoin, you are kind of essentially investing in global climate, environment, cleaning technology.
I love it. Thanks so much for coming on today, Dennis.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.